Hello, and welcome once again to Cinemaholics. Usually it's John Negroni that introduces you to the show, but unfortunately John Negroni is absent for this week's episode, so you got me, your regular co-host, Will Ashton, being on the MC, the main mic, this time around, and thankfully I am not alone. I'm joined by my good friend and friend of the podcast as well, Cory Woodroof. Hey, Cory.
Hey, what's going on, Will?
Not too much. I should have mentioned earlier that I'm a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend as well as a writer for Cinemaholics. What are some of the sites you write for nowadays?
You can find me at the Nashville Scene. You can find me at the Playlist. If you're randomly an Atlanta Falcons fan listening to this podcast, you can find me on SB Nation's The Falcoholic. And if you somehow meet this bizarre cross-section of following Williamson County High School football, or any other sport that pertains to that in the state of Tennessee, you can find me with Homepage Media Group. But I'm guessing that things like the Playlist would make a lot more sense than something like that.
You never know, man. I think there's some crossover here.
There could be.
Yeah.
I'll tell you all about the Brentwood and Ravenwood playoff matchups and anything like there, if those terms make sense to anyone listening.
Yeah, I would say it wouldn't really be a riveting conversation, only in that I just have nothing I can add to that conversation. Yeah. So just mostly be you covering that, but that's fine.
It'd be a bit of a different episode for Cinemaholics.
Yeah, it would be a little different for our normal conversations, but yeah. Real quick, you can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our main archive, full archive at cinemaholics.com, and you can also write into the show anytime by emailing us at cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com, and you can directly support us by becoming one of our monthly patrons at patreon.com/cinemaholics. So we got a pretty full ep, not as full as the last two, because I don't know if you have been paying attention. We've had some like really long eps recently. And I'm hoping this one can be like at least 90 minutes or less, because I think it's good to have a podcast that doesn't go over the 2-hour mark every time. I think that's
a good thing. We're known for brevity when we have conversations.
Well, I was going to say earlier that, so we've had you on, I think the last time was when we did our mini ep for The Fanatic. Mm-hmm. What were some other eps that you were on recently? I'm trying to remember.
Recently, I remember we did a gigantic one where we talked about Tim Burton's Dumbo for like 90 minutes.
Oh, yeah, and the beach bum and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Greta, and then you've been on a bunch of episodes, but
yeah, I have.
It's been a little bit since you've been on the main show, so it's good to have you back on. And I'm really excited to talk about these two movies in particular. We're going to be talking about Dr. Sleep and Last Christmas in just a little bit, as well as a particularly noteworthy mini review that I'm sure you're all chomping at the bit to find out what it is. But
a future Criterion title, to spoil it, if we're going to be just a regular film that you would have found in the library of Ingmar Bergman, George Malee. I mean, all of these filmmakers of the past. They would love this film you're going to talk about.
Right. Well, it had to take over for Sonic the Hedgehog, which is a huge legacy to live up to.
Well, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just have any old random film take over for Sonic, right? You can't just give that away, that release slot away. It has to be something of note that is very important, that is worthy of discussion, and we'll discuss that in a bit. We won't tease much longer. But before we get into that, just some off topics we have real quick. We previously released our extra milestone for October centered around Ed Wood on Patreon, but now it's available just on the website. You can listen to it anytime. It's free. You can check it out. And I hope you enjoy it, because it's a particularly fun one we had. And I don't know if you've seen it or not. Have you seen Ed Wood, Cory?
That is like one of my gigantic, I need to finally watch that movies, because there's like that time where like if it didn't come out in theaters when I was like a functioning adult, like I have to like go back and begin my gigantic archives of looking at the history of cinema. So I wish my parents would have taken me to see that when I was like 2. That would have been helpful.
I think it's probably better that you probably get more out of it now than when you were 2. But
yeah, I was more into The Lion King then. But
sure.
I mean, I would have taken Ed Wood. I mean, I probably would have appreciated the aesthetics a bit more when I was 2 and get the performances now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you ever get a chance, I'd highly recommend you and anyone else who hasn't seen the film check out Ed Wood. It's definitely a classic in my view, and I think if you have seen it, you'll get something out of our conversation. So that's on the site. I hope you check it out. And I just want to tease real quick that if you're interested in helping us decide what we're going to pick for next month's episode, or I guess technically this month's episode because it'll be for November, we have a couple options. We got Godzilla, the original one from the 50s, 1954, if I'm not mistaken. The original Ben-Hur, the original Murder on the Orient Express. That would be the 70s one, not the Kenneth Branagh one that came out a couple years ago. One Under the Influence, which is John Cassavetes film. Life of Brian from Monty Python, and then the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Cory, if you had to have your pick, which would you say is the one that we should discuss next or this month?
Well, if you guys aren't going to do Atlantis 2 Milo's Return, which would be my pick.
Yeah, that was debated.
Yeah, I think I would have gone with that, or Lady and the Tramp 2 Scamp's Adventure. London Adventure, excuse me.
Yeah.
Geographically specific. I would probably be curious to hear you guys go back and forth on, well, I mean, Cassavetes died this year, so I think that would be kind of an interesting, that's not like a lot of those other titles are like big movies, but I feel like the Cassavetes film is unique enough to where it's like, oh, you could probably do some educating there of who he was, what his influence was, and kind of, because he was obviously so big for the modern indie movement.
Oh, yeah.
Everything kind of comes from that style. So that'd probably be my vote, because I've not seen a Cassavetes film. So it would give me a reason to actually go out and watch one and then have something to kind of deal with. But
yeah, I've only seen one Cassavetes film, and that's Opening Night. And this one is one that's been on my radar for a while. So if I had to have one that I could pick, I'd probably pick this one. But I am very tempted to talk about Godzilla because it's a classic for a reason. As well as Life of Brian.
I did that in the theater in 2014, and it was a really cool experience.
The original one, in black and white and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's a envious experience. Was that in 35 millimeter, or was that just a digital print?
I want to say it was a DCP, but
even still.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was right when the first Garth Edwards film came out, and it was at the Belcourt and here in Nashville, and it was just super, super cool.
Nice. That is a very envious experience, like I said. Also, a couple weeks ago, I forgot to promote our newest episode of Ain't Ogre Toots Ogre. So that's me doing that belatedly. It's a pretty fun one we did for the month of for the month of October for Halloween with our good friend Lauren O'Brien, and it's weirdly one of our longest episodes just because we had a lot that we ended up talking about. It got a little kooky, so definitely if you are a fan of that podcast that I do, I'd highly recommend that one as well.
So you're on your 11th Garfield watch almost.
Yeah, we're gonna have 11th. I think we're recording it next week.
Oh wow!
So yeah, we're coming up on it. And,
how are you okay? I mean, you've watched Garfield 11 times in a row.
I mean, it's fun at this point. Like it's
that's good.
It's a rare bit of consistency in my life where it's like I know at one point this month I'm going to be watching Garfield again, and it's like it doesn't change. It's one of the few things that doesn't change in my life. So it's nice to have some sort of comfort. It's almost like home at this point. It's just like...
You seem like you're handling this better than you did Cat in the Hat 12 times in a row.
Well,
like
Cat in the Hat, yeah, for sure. What were you going to say?
Maybe your love of Garfield in general has helped you kind of buoy that movie, because watching Cat in the Hat 12 times in a row is just... I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to not watch that movie and get a little stir crazy.
Mm-hmm.
With Garfield, though, it's such like a mellow, like nonchalant film that it's kind of hard to like get kooky about it. It's just like a very banal film. So
it's just not very good. I mean, it's just, there's some weird stuff about it, but it's just by and large like it's like the Marmaduke film adaptation.
Oh,
I didn't see it, but I'm guessing that, you know.
The only thing I remember about the Marmaduke adaptation, I promise that we'll get off this tangent in just a little bit, but the only thing I remember about the Marmaduke film is that like towards the end they had like a dance scene because, you know, like it was a kid's film from 2010, so there was like a dance scene towards the end, but it was like very poorly CGI'd, and they're like all dancing in like two rows, and it was just like very like I don't even know how to describe it. It was just like a very cynical experience. Just watching, like, I don't know who the creator of Marmaduke was, but from what I recall, like, Marmaduke is just a very, like, kind of family circus kind of strip where it's just like one joke. It's like one panel and one joke where it's just like, the dog is on my lap, or like, the dog ate my breakfast.
Eat pancakes on Wednesday.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's just like very like this. It's not like Clifford, but it's like kind of similar. It's like this dog is big. It's kind of messing up my life, but like not ruining it. It's just like mild inconvenience. And then like it is baffling that they made a movie out of it. But
well, that's the cinema that Martin Scorsese was talking about.
Oh, for sure.
Not the MCU. It's the Marmaduke film adaptation.
He's like, if you guys took the right lessons, you'd be a little more like Marmaduke. I'm just saying.
That's right. Try that, Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, exactly. So we have this new segment now, Corey, since you've joined the show, called Question of the Week, where we ask the listeners just a random question that's related to the film we previously discussed or the film we're going to be discussing the next week or later in the episode. In this case, the question we asked was, which Stephen King movie or TV series was better than source material? Now, before I pull up the answers, do you have any in particular that stand out to you?
I mean, my favorite movie of all time is The Shawshank Redemption, so I probably would definitely say that.
Okay.
If only because I'm not to be too... Can you be spoilery about a movie that came out in 1994? I mean,
I think the embargo is free.
Yeah, I think I'm good.
But, real quick, I guess, if you don't want to be spoiled about Shawshank Redemption, skip like a minute ahead.
Yeah, seriously. This will give you some time to walk around the yard a little bit. No, obviously, I think the Shawshank Redemption's film ending, like with the scene where they're in Guantanamo and Andy and Red actually meet again, because the King short story leaves it kind of hopeful but ambiguous, where Red kind of just hopes that he finds Andy again.
Yeah.
And obviously the film's ending, to me, well, I think that it's one of the very rare times where it is obviously so pandering to audience satisfaction, but it just works because you've spent like 2.5 hours with these characters. They've been through so much. You're just like, let's just give them a happy ending. And I think that, you know, the Hollywood happy ending at times kind of gets kind of cast down upon because you're just like, where's the realism? Where's the poetic irony? But I feel like with the way that Frank Darabont made the Shawshank Redemption film, that it would have felt incomplete if we didn't have at least one little gigantic glimmer of sun to shine through. And I think that, you know, the King story, I think probably works better to have it ambiguous. But I think that since the film is so full, and obviously I think it's one of the great movies that's ever been made, you just needed that little bit. And it works so well. So I definitely would go with Shawshank.
Yeah. Have you read the story that's based upon?
A little bit of it. Okay. I've read some. I mean, I kind of get the gist. I think they're pretty similar outside of that glaring, you know, ending. But I mean, King was... Darabont obviously is someone who worked with King's material a lot. I mean, you know, he did that in The Mist. So
and Green Mile,
yeah. So I mean, there's obviously a lot that, you know, King seems to have trusted Darabont with his stuff, and he's obviously a guy that has thoughts. We'll talk more about later about his movies being adapted or his books being adapted to movies. But I mean, I think that Shawshank would be my pick.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating because, I was gonna say, in regards to Shawshank, that's one of the stories I think it's fair to say that the movies kind of eclipse what King wrote. And I think you can say The Shining to some respect might have done that as well compared to the book, which I think kind of adds to Stephen King's saltiness about it. But we'll get into that more in a bit. I do think you make a good point though, where it's like, I feel like there's this weird reputation with Stephen King. Maybe it's died down in recent years because he's been quick to praise a lot of the adaptations. But for a while, he had like this reputation of like, oh, like Stephen King is like hard to please, or like he you know, doesn't like his movies. Where it's like, so far as I can tell, like, I mean, you know, there are exceptions. Like I remember like he like on Twitter a couple months ago, like randomly dissed the CBS Under the Dome series, like just randomly. It was just like, hey, Netflix, could you do that and do it good? And it was just like a very random, like passive aggressive thing that came out of nowhere because like nobody's been thinking about Under the Dome for like 4 years.
Yeah, the pop culture standard, Under the Dome. When I think of domes, I think of the Simpsons movie.
Yeah. I always thought that was weird too, because I remember like the book came out after the Simpsons movie, and I was like, wait a minute, did he see the Simpsons movie? And I was like,
I can do this better.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it was just a very weird coincidence, I
Mhm.
guess. I'll chalk it up to a coincidence at least. But anyway, to my earlier point, I just feel like, so far as I can tell, like, I feel like he's generally like okay with a lot of the adaptation of his works. It's just that he's very famously against The Shining, which is just kind of surprising for a lot of reasons, which, we'll talk about more about why he doesn't like The Shining and because he does have some pretty valid reasons, I think, for why he doesn't like the film, even if I don't necessarily agree with his stance on it. But, any case, just looking at some of the comments we got, regarding to this question, one commenter called Back in the 90s said, "My choice is Misery, which in my opinion makes what was otherwise a cringeworthy Stephen King story into something powerful and compelling. Kathy Bates is so good at drawing the line between angelic and demonic, and James Caan is at no point an imbecile, yet you feel how impossible his situation is the whole way through." Where do you stand on Misery, Corey?
I think Misery is great. I think Misery that was like I remember I watched it in middle school, and it was one of my very first exposures to like horror, I guess, outside of like the kiddie horror that we had some dark stuff we watched when we were kids. I was just thinking back on that the other day, but there was a really nice base for that. But that was back when I was really kind of beginning to get my feelers out in terms of what thrillers and horror were about. And I mean, Kathy Bates in that film is just great, and I think she got nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, she won.
Oh, she won. That's right. Yeah. So I mean, obviously it's a landmark genre performance, and James Caan's really good, and I just love tales of obsession. I think that's just such a fascinating subject to explore in film. And I think that's definitely one of the King works where you do look at the movie first. Like that tends to be every time someone brings it up. Like It has always been more of like the book usually gets mentioned before. Now the movie's obviously huge, or you look at like, The Stand, or you look at, Pet Sematary. These are things that like the book usually comes up first, but Misery to me always seems like the film has dominated the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, and I'm going to be paraphrasing, I think Stephen King has said in the past that Rob Reiner is like, I think his favorite director for adapting his work. Not his favorite director of all time, but like when it comes to adapting his work, I think he's most appreciated Rob Reiner's take on his films because he, in addition to doing Misery, he also did Stand By Me, which I believe Stephen King at one point said was his favorite adaptation of his work, which makes a lot of sense.
And man, what a run for Rob Reiner during the middle of all of that. I think he and Frank Oz both have gone on two of the most underrated like runs of eclectic films in that like late 80s, early 90s. And obviously both of them kind of either stopped directing or really lost their touch, I guess. But man, Reiner especially, like he just made like 4 or 5 like legitimately like all-time great movies in a really short amount of time.
Yeah, it was quite a run, and unfortunately, I think it ended with Alex and Emma or whatever the Luke Wilson one was.
Yeah, it's either that or that one where it was the kind of, I can't remember what it was called. It was like came out in like the mid '90s, and it was like primed to
North.
be like North. Yeah.
I forgot about North. Yeah, the one Roger Ebert famously hated so much that his review is, I think, more famous than the film itself at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, yeah, so our next commenter is Ron Swanson, and I believe that he's not the actual Ron Swanson, but I like to believe.
Hey, you never know.
Yeah. He's crossed that threshold into reality to just comment on our site. But some of the obvious movies include The Shining, Carrie, and Shawshank Redemption, which we just talked about. But if we're going for deeper cuts, I really want to shout out Graveyard Shift, which is a lovable, low-budget horror movie where the change from the book is almost a joke onto itself. Very enjoyable. And then, big fan of these Questions of the Week segments, by the way. Yeah, I mean, that's a fun one that I was not expecting. Because, I expected, I think Carrie was pretty, like he said, Carrie, Shawshank, Shining, like we said, those are pretty obvious picks. But Graveyard Shift is not one that is brought up much at all, I would say. So that was a fun little pick. And yeah, I'll have to check that one out because I'm not that familiar with Graveyard Shift, truth be told, the source material or the film adaptation. And then we have one other commenter who is going by This Is 30, I believe, as a like a joke or a twist on This Is 40, the Judd Apatow film.
A classic.
Yeah. I I can't believe John isn't a King fan. Oh yeah, I forgot we talked about yesterday that John is not a big fan, which is, I guess, I have to assume that's a reason why he's not. He went out of town just so he could avoid talking about another Stephen King adaptation. That's canon. I would have assumed the opposite. Anyway, I have to go with The Dead Zone, which isn't just a great King movie. It's a superb David Cronenberg film no one likes to talk about for some reason. Christopher Walken is so good in the part, and don't forget Martin Sheen. It's a terrific film that blows the book away, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, these are some pretty interesting picks. Like I said, some I anticipated, some I did not. But it's always fun to get some different perspectives. And as we mentioned last week, Stephen King has such an eclectic variety of books, and so many films have been made from his books that it is, really, you just have your the devil's bargain. It's just like so many picks you can have from his filmography that, good and bad. But I mean, he is, a big source of pop culture. I don't know what the word it would be. Pop culture inspiration.
He's like one of the most influential like storytellers in any medium of the 20th century. Yeah. I mean, just for what he did to horror. I mean, it's so interesting. Like, you just think of the film impact of his stuff, but like, think of the literary impact. I mean, he's one of the most important genre writers. And I think a writer that, obviously there are some people that are a bit more kind of, high minded that don't like Stephen King. They think he's a populist work. But I think that like he's still one of the great genre writers. And I still think that there's this base of people who appreciate his writing as some of the best writing of his time. And it's hard. We don't hail literary icons anymore who are really, really great like we do people of other mediums that are really talented. I think that King was really one of the last like great writers before everything kind of more focused into, visual media.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot said about King, and I've said a lot about Stephen King on the show. I mean, one thing I do love about him though is that he built his success from the ground up. Like, he was a guy who really, he used his platform and his writing and his talents to make his name. Like, he's not someone who's like, it's not like a nepotism thing or anything like, or he really was just like a humble Midwestern guy who rose up because of his, talents and his writing capabilities and his stories. And so that's a very commendable thing. And I think, he has earned his success, and, he's far from flawless as a writer, but, I think his greatest films, or his greatest books, have, stand the test of time for a reason.
Sure.
So, just real quick, we're also going to mention what the question of the week is for next week. We actually have two provided by Cory. Cory, do you remember what they are? If not, I have them written down here.
Yeah, I think one of them is going to be, since we've got the Charlie's Angel film adaptation, which I think did some like preview screenings tonight across the country, which shows a little confidence, which is good. I mean, obviously anytime I always hope movies are good, no matter what the movie is, because if there's the odds that I'm going to see it, I hope it's not going to be a waste of time. But obviously that's a legendary television property that's been brought to film before, but now it's being brought back. But if you had to pick a television property from whatever span of film, or television, I should say, what would it be and why? What would you like to see brought to the theaters via a new vision? Maybe it's a reunion that's done for film, like the Downton Abbey film, or maybe it's just like a TV series that's on right now that would get a film adaptation of its own. So I think the other question involves Ford versus Ferrari, which obviously opens nationwide next week. James Mangold, who obviously his profile has elevated a bit, but he's always been a very consistent, high quality director who makes really good kind of blue collar, craft heavy films. Is he underrated? Do you think that James Mangold deserves to be discussed in this like kind of upper echelon of directors, or do you think that he's kind of evaluated properly? I think that there's going to be an interesting conversation with this new film that comes out, especially if it gets some awards attention. If Mangold really needs to be considered like among the best kind of adult drama contemporary directors.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see where our listeners stand on both those questions. Particularly because that the first one can be kind of broad. Like, it could be a show that's on TV right now, Or it could be like a Man from U.N.C.L.E. thing where it's like they revive a show that people are not that familiar with. And, it can be kind of odd that they're bringing it back. But, if anyone can make a valid case for that one, I definitely would love to hear it. And yeah, I'm very curious where people stand on James Mangold because, I have my opinions about him and I'll talk about that more next week when we talk about Ford versus Ferrari. But I think he is definitely someone who has impressed in many different points. And I'm curious to see if people consider him underrated, overrated, or just plain rated. And yeah, with that, which one do you want to talk about? So you have gotten recently a chance to see Jojo Rabbit, the Taika Waititi movie we just talked about, or that we talked about on the show a week or so ago. And you've also had a chance to check out the new Netflix special, Seth Meyers, Lobby Baby. Which one would you want to talk about first?
I can talk about Jojo.
Okay.
Yeah, so obviously this has become one of the most controversial films of the year, one of the most hotly debated online.
Yeah, it's a divisive film.
Oh yeah, and people's reactions have been wildly different. They've been like that since Toronto, and it won the Audience Award at Toronto, which is one of the biggest bellwethers for the Academy Awards. Obviously, that has portended at least a nomination in Best Picture, so it obviously sent a lot of interest for this. I mean, I remember when it got announced. I mean, I really do like Taika Waititi because Hunt for the Wilder People is just one of my favorite comedies of the decade. I love his vision. I really had a lot of fun with Thor Ragnarok. I think he's a very, very, very interesting director. And even though What We Do in the Shadows is not quite my favorite movie, I think there's some good stuff in it. So I was really curious to check this out, and the preview was great. That's one of my favorite trailers of the year, just because it's just so outlandish and interesting, and I really do like it. It's a movie I think is a lot more, for such a divisive film, it's just so meek and unassuming. I was very caught off guard by how small it feels and how very intimate of a character study it is on Jojo. And I think the trailer kind of promises big, outlandish, Mel Brooksy, comedy satire. And the film to me is so focused in on Jojo and the young Jewish girl played by Thomasin McKenzie, who is being hid in his home. Obviously, if you don't know about the film, which is hard if you're listening to a film podcast, I feel like you know what Jojo Rabbit is by now, but it's about a young boy in Nazi Germany who's obviously been swayed by a lot of the really bad, Nazi propaganda that swept the whole country at that time. And it's about him kind of rectifying with his belief by interacting with a young Jewish girl who his mother is hiding in their home. And at the same time, the part that a lot of people are kind of doing second takes for is that he has an imaginary friend that is Adolf Hitler, who's played by Waititi, who he interacts with, and is a very, very satirical view of Hitler, of course. So it's a very delicate film, obviously a very risky film, and it's very much not the material it's adapted from. That's a very serious story, and this is obviously played as a big, broad, indie comedy. I really liked it. It's not a movie where it's just I'm this is great. This is one of the best things I've seen this year. I was just really impressed with its humanity. I think that Waititi is so good at those small observational comedy moments, and he kind of really relishes in finding the awkwardness of life, of youth. I mean, if you've seen Hunt for the Wilder People, Ricky Baker is just such a well-developed, funny character in so many small ways that it really adds up into something that's really big. And I think that he does that with Jojo. I think that the young man who plays him, I don't have the name quite, I think it's Roman Griffin Davis. He's really, really good. I mean, just for a young performer. I mean, I think that young actors are, a lot more interesting than people give them credit for in a general sense. But I think the kid's really good. And I love Thomasin McKenzie in anything she does. I think she's an incredibly interesting young actress that is in a really good movie, Leave No Trace, that didn't get a ton of love last year outside of the critic circles, that I think, deserved a bit more attention from general audiences. But, it's just, I can see where the conversations come from. Obviously, this film can launch 1,000 think pieces and ideas, but I think it's just a very simple film about how love overpowers hate. And I know that people were kind of making fun of Disney, calling it an anti-hate satire in the marketing, but I think that's the best thing about it, is that it really is very decisive on what it wants to say. That it's about this young kid, and they analyze why he gets swayed by these ideas and why he wants to be a part of all of this. And it really just nails down kind of the almost patheticism of why people want to join these just terrible movements. And, there are glimmers of hope shown throughout. And obviously, I think that the film that gets compared to a lot is Life is Beautiful. So this feels like a kind of a not modern day, that movie came out in the late 90s, but a more recent version of that, I would say. So I think your mileage will vary. I think it's a movie that a lot of people won't be receptive to. I think it's a movie that if you're receptive, you're like gung ho, which is why I'm a bit perplexed myself that I'm like in like an A-B+ range. I think it's a really good movie and I really liked it. I'd watch it again. There's some things about it that I really do like, but in a hypothetical sense, I'm kind of, not quite as enamored as like the furthest people.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a film I haven't seen yet. I think I'm going to try to see it sometime next week. I know that the theater closest to me just picked up Parasite and Jojo Rabbit. So hopefully if I can make the time, I'm going to see both of them, maybe back to back, or at least one, and the other like the next day or something like that. But yeah, I'm definitely very curious to see Jojo Rabbit for many of the reasons that you've said. And also because it does seem like, for better or for worse, it is going to be an awards contender. It might even win Best Picture, which, as you were saying, would be kind of like another Green Book situation, which will be very interesting. I don't know if the conversation will be more or less intense if it wins Best Picture compared to Green Book. I imagine maybe a little less, but I don't know. It's hard to say without having seen the film myself. But anyway, you, like I said, have also seen a new Netflix special, an hour-long special from Seth Meyers called Lobby Baby. What can you tell me about that?
Well, the nice thing about the Netflix specials is that they really are getting this really nice cross-section of talent. And Seth Meyers is obviously someone we know, I've known for a long time. I could go on a really long diatribe on Seth Meyers that I won't do, but kind of the long, short version of it is that I think a lot of us got a little tired of him on Saturday Night Live because of his Weekend Update stuff and how Weekend Update got really stale. And I think that was very quietly a big driving force behind why that. I mean, he was the head writer while he was there. I mean, it wasn't that quiet, but he was that run of SNL. I think a lot of us are nostalgic for. He was really one of the things that really breathed life into that. And then he kind of got to a point where he kind of overstayed his welcome in the Weekend Update stuff. And then he did his late night show, which I think took a year or two to really find its footing. But I think some people have been wise to pick up on this, and I've kind of picked up on it myself. Like, he has become one of the like best voices in comedy right now. I mean, he's just very patiently built his style back up from where it was on SNL, and his political commentary is fantastic. If you've ever kind of tuned in to what he's been doing with Late Night with Seth Meyers, I mean, the show has become really strong. He's a really great interviewer. Like, his skits are interesting. The talents he's elevating. Obviously, you and I are big Joe Pera fans. That was one of the very first places that he appeared. Connor O'Malley was on that writing staff. Yeah.
It's funny because if you watch Joe Pera Talks with You, what's his name? What's his best friend on the show?
We should know this. We're like,
it's like
the camera guy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, it's literally like he found this guy. Joe Pera found this guy just because he was a cameraman on his show, and then Gene,
of course,
Gene Kelly, I think, or not Gene Kelly, or just Gene. But yeah, he was just like he wasn't an actor. He was just a cameraman on the is it Late Show with Seth Meyers?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he just like became friends with him. And for my money, I think Gene gives like the best performance on Joe Pera Talks with You, which is a show I highly recommend if you haven't watched already. Season 2 is going to be coming up soon.
Yeah, I think it comes out December 6th.
But anyway, not to deride from what you were saying. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I'm a big Meyers fan. I think that his style of humor is very underappreciated. I think his political commentary has become really strong. And obviously, I think Jimmy Fallon is beginning to really overstay his welcome on The Tonight Show. And I'm wondering if there might be a changing of the guard there sooner than a lot of us are expecting. But
there's some behind the scenes stuff going on, apparently.
Oh, really?
I mean, I guess the showrunner left and there's some drama behind it. I don't really follow it too much because I don't care much for Jimmy Fallon personally, but I know he has some baggage, and there's some like kind of open secrets about his habitual habits without getting too specific. But yeah, I don't know what's going on with him, but I would not be heartbroken if he left the show, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that Fallon's just like one of those guys that, you know, not to start a big Tonight Show conversation, but yeah, I just think his style of humor worked really well at a certain point, and then it kind of became stale. But Meyers, to me, I actually saw him in New York because I was trying to get Fallon tickets, ironically, and I couldn't get them, so I got him for Seth Meyers. And it was right when Trump announced he was running for president. It's like the same day. And Meyers was so good at just breaking it down, the absurdity behind it, but he took it seriously too. Like, it wasn't just throwing tomatoes. I think he was also trying to like address that this guy is not, this is not a good thing either. So, and the show was really good. I had done Jon Stewart too that week, so it was a really nice kind of bounce between for the New York Live stuff. But for the stand-up special, it's really interesting to see the approach he took, because it is very much observational family life humor. And it's obviously, if you kind of know the history of stand-up, this is the type of humor that people kind of raise their eyebrow at. Like, it's the very obvious, I have a wife, I have kids, I'm observing living with them. And usually that humor, you know, it's been done before, it's been done a million times. And Jerry Seinfeld, you know, is making millions and millions of dollars every year still doing that type of humor. It's just not very adventurous. It's just very easy to plays to a broad audience. But I thought the approach that Meyers took to really make it his own and really actually tell some legitimately funny stories. Obviously, the title comes from an incident that happened a few years ago where his wife delivered their second child in the lobby, which is why it's called Lobby Baby. And the first time they almost didn't make it to the hospital because she was in an Uber. And so there's obviously been some fascinating stories there. But the strength to me is that Meyers just has this really affable personality. And I think he really leans into that. It's a very genial style and earnest style of comedy. And that it kind of wins you over the old fashioned way. And I think that it's very much a personality show. He's not like a John Mulaney to where his bits are just so well developed, or he's not like a, you know, maybe some other contemporaries that really just like build up with all of these, just like, oh my gosh, where did you think of that type of humor? I mean, obviously everything he does is what he experiences in life. He talks a lot about his engagement process and his wedding and having kids and having friends that have kids and what that process is like. And you would kind of feel like that's a lot of grown-worthy humor we've heard a million times. But I was thoroughly surprised and enjoyed his take. And when he started getting going, it was kind of like, oh, it's Seth Meyers. He's talking. This is maybe a bit of a vanity project, but he's got the power to do that. But it was a really satisfying hour of comedy. He goes into politics and other subjects for maybe about 20 minutes of the set. It runs for really a hard hour. It's a refreshing level of, you know, I like the way he approached it. He obviously goes into the Trump presidency, but it was in a way that kind of felt, you know, like it was nice to hear him talk about it in this setting, because he's obviously someone who deals with this on a day in, day out basis, and kind of talking at it from a macro sense instead of just the micro day-to-day detail. And there's a really nice bit that I won't spoil it, but it involves kind of a Netflix feature popping up, and the payoff is really satisfying. I mean, that's probably my favorite part of the whole set, is how he ends up paying off with that. It's a very patient style of, you know, the joke leads up to something that happens 20 minutes later and then he finishes. It's like, you know, it's kind of the old school level of comedy. And you know, if you're a Seth Meyers fan, I say absolutely watch it. If you don't really like him, I don't know if this will necessarily win you over, but it just feels like a nice play for him to flex those muscles. It's not a groundbreaking set or anything, but it was a nice set.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you grade, but I remember we don't actually do grades for comedy specials, at least, but it's good to hear. I've admitted this before on the show, but I'm very bad at keeping up with stand-up specials on Netflix. I think I end up seeing like one or two a year just because it's something that, I don't know, for some reason, if I have something that always gets stuck in my queue, it's a Netflix comedy specials, because I guess there's a part of my brain that's like, oh, they'll be on there.
Yeah,
but
there's too many. I feel like, I mean, obviously Netflix is over creating content, but it really takes them to promote it, or it's like it's a gigantic name. I'm hoping we get Eddie's in the next year, because I just.
Oh yeah, I forgot that's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You think it's going to come out this year?
I don't know. I kept thinking they kept saying maybe December, but I don't know if he's recorded it yet. But my guess is it would be sometime next year. And obviously Chappelle's good for 1 or 2 a year, even though that's a completely different conversation.
Sure. I know he's hosting SNL pretty soon, so they might try. They might try to do something with that, like around the same time. But we'll see.
Yeah, I could see it being like a surprise drop. I mean, obviously, Eddie Murphy. Did you watch his stand-up set he did for the Kennedy Center honors?
Oh yeah, it's a few years ago. Yeah, but
that's still one of my favorite things I've seen recently, just in stand-up comedy in general.
Yeah, I mean, he's a master stand-up, and yeah, I'm very curious to see that special. But yeah, so that's Seth Meyers, or let me say it one more time. Seth Meyers, Lobby Baby. And, just before we get into our Dr. Sleep conversation, I'm just going to mention real quick that, a film we talked about the week prior was Marriage Story, the Noah Baumbach film. And I finally got a chance to see that on Monday. And to echo a lot of what John said, I think it's a fantastic film. Very rich, very warm, very human, very personal, very profound, and I believe it's a must-see.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you've seen it as well, so we can jump to you as well. But I just wanted to mention that. Like I said, John said a lot of things I was going to say here, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. But either if you can see it in theaters or on Netflix next month. See in theaters this month, watch on Netflix next month. Definitely make a point to see it, because it's one you don't want to miss.
Yeah, it's I think you put it pretty nicely. I mean, it's a very adjective ready film. Like, it's just one of those things where you're trying to describe what it is, and it's about so much. It's about, the quality of it it feels like one of those movies we're going to be talking about for a long time. And I think that Noah Baumbach has been building up to this his entire career. It's a deeply humane film. It's one of those movies that we've been scared we're going to lose. And I think that's why it's even better, because it's like very much like the template for like, these are the movies we're trying to save. And I think this is why this whole like Scorsese versus Marvel conversation really has a legitimate like conflict at the heart of it, outside of just the petty stuff, is that like, we are losing these films. And I think this is why these streaming companies making them is really important. And it feels like just yesterday that Steven Spielberg called these films like, made for TV, like glorified TV movies. And it was just like, there's this whole, I don't know, the heart of the whole industry right now is about saving these types of movies. And Anthony Mackie talked about a really interesting clip that's been circulating on Twitter about the death of the movie star, and that he's not a movie star, but the Falcon character he plays in the Avengers series is, and that people are worried because it's like the IP are becoming why people go to the movies, and not the people, not the ideas, that it's very generated on brands. And I don't know, it feels so good that a movie like Marriage Story has gotten made, that money has been put into it. This is a higher budget production. This is not, cheap indeed. It's a lot of elbow grease that's been put into the side. And obviously,
I think 18 million was the budget on it.
Oh yeah, and that's like pretty astronomical for something like this.
It's like basically a mid-budget film at that point.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, like you said, the mid-budget films are what are dying ultimately at this point. We obviously we're still probably gonna have a lot of like Blumhouse $5 million films, because they're low risk, and they can turn them out. And if it's not successful, no harm, no foul. But and we're gonna still probably get any number of huge big budget temple IP films, like you said, but these are films that I'm really worried are going to be lost in the shuffle. And and it's easy to, okay, boomer, Martin Scorsese for what he was saying, but I do think it has some validity. And I do think, what he said, a lot of what he said was true, in that like this feels like a film. Like, this feels like a movie that's very like personal and moving. And it feels like Noah Baumbach like took his heart and put it on the table and was like, this is what I have to say right now about this. Something that happened to him, and, and obviously a dramatized fictional way, but it does relate to something that he went through. And it's something that is very much about his life and about how he perceives life and how he, went through it and kind of coped with it. And it's a very it's a very touching and sincere film, but it's also very funny in certain points as well. And it's also, like I was saying earlier, it's a very human film. It feels like something that, you would have gotten a little more regularly, maybe in like 2007 or 2009. And now it's becoming a bit of a rarity. And that's a shame, but I hope if you have a chance to see it either in theaters or on Netflix, you do get a chance to see it, because it's very much worth watch. So, yeah, I mean, that's, the gist of it, I'll say for now. And let's just get into our main review for Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep, it's kind of like three different things at once. I see it as. It's like, I mean, the bare gist of it, the way it's being pitched and sold is that it is a sequel to The Shining. And when people see that or hear that, they're like, oh, it's like a sequel to Stanley Kubrick's film The Shining, which is technically true to an extent. It kind of feels more like a spiritual sequel to that, in my view. It's kind of like the way that like 2010 is a sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And that, yeah, it is like, it's a sequel, but it's kind of more a sequel to like the book that inspired it. Like, it's like, it's not really trying to be Stanley Kubrick's like successor. It's not like the director here, writer director Mike Flanagan is like trying to just live up to Stanley Kubrick's standards, because that's like basically impossible. So he's just like, I'm just trying to make like a kind of like homage or tribute to Stephen King in addition to Stanley Kubrick, and it kind of produces this odd mix where it's like trying to be an adaptation, like a more strict adaptation of the books, both The Shining and Dr. Sleep, and a spiritual sequel, like I said, to The Shining the movie and a Mike Flanagan movie. And if you don't know Mike Flanagan, he's been pretty consistently becoming one of the more outstanding horror directors of this past decade or so. He first got on my radar around the time that Oculus and Hush were coming out, which are two films that I really enjoyed. I don't think I loved either of them, but I thought they were both pretty good for what they were. But the film that really kind of turned me into a big Mike Flanagan fan, rather surprisingly, was Okja: Origin of Evil, which is a film that I went in with zero expectations. Like, why does this movie exist? Why is this here? Who bothered it? I found that to be, I think, one of my favorite horror movies that year. Maybe even the past couple of years, because it really stood out to me in ways that I was not anticipating. And that was a film where I was like, okay, this guy, he's got something. He's obviously, he is, gotten thread and turned it into gold. And I don't think he quite found that same success with Gerald's Game, even though I do like that movie a good bit. I think it's a very solid adaptation, but I've been hearing that The Haunting of Hill House is some of his best work.
It's really good.
I haven't had a chance to see that yet. Where do you stand on Mike Flanagan's work before we get too ahead of ourselves?
I've only seen Hill House of anything. Okay. I remember when Ouija, how do you pronounce that?
Ouija. Sorry, I think I might say Ouija.
Okja, Origin of Evil.
The
Ouija sisters.
Sorry, Ouija.
Yeah, I thought I was like, oh, I didn't know that word was pronounced like that.
Ouija, Origin of Evil.
Yeah, I remember when that came out, the reviews were surprisingly good for, I guess, the sequel to whatever the first movie was, and usually don't see that.
It was a prequel, yeah.
Prequel. Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. So I mean, that's even weirder ground for there to be really good critical support on. But Hill House, I watched for the playlist, and I wasn't even going to watch it because, I'm not like the biggest horror fan. And, I didn't really, especially TV show, I was like, I don't really know. But I watched all of it, and I thought it was really good. It was a very interesting story. Obviously, it's the Hill House story, which people have told in different ways for years. But it's really satisfying, a really well-cast show. I mean, he's got a really nice eye for an ensemble, and it's a very pathos-driven show about, the ghosts that, it's like the themes kind of become apparent. It's about kind of it's a really big family drama, and it deals with themes like addiction and, trauma from childhood and confronting, the general dynamics of being in a haunted house. And that
kind of leads into this film.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And I think that was a gigantic audition for Dr. Sleep, because those are very similar stories. And I think you'd really like Hill House if you ever get a chance to watch it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's one I definitely want to check out. Just like I said earlier, in addition to comedy specials on Netflix, shows on Netflix tend to also, they get stuck on my queue and time passes and I just don't get a chance to watch them. I'm not quite as consistent about keeping up with Netflix TV as probably should be, because there's a lot of great stuff going on right now in streaming. But yeah, there's also Before Awake and a couple other films that he's done that we didn't mention. I think Before Awake has Jacob Tremblay in it, who makes a brief and rather disturbing cameo. And
yeah, he did. I didn't know he was.
Yeah, Dr. Sleep.
Sheesh.
But yeah, so he's been working, I'd say, it seems like apparently since at least 2000, and he's been really, standing out in the past 5 or 10 years, I'd say. And yeah, it's fascinating that, now he is at the helm of a sequel to The Shining, which I believe at one point was like directors like Alfonso Cuarón and a couple others were attached to this project. And like I said, Mike Flanagan's still not quite like a household name in the way that Stanley Kubrick was when The Shining was coming out. But I think he definitely has earned his right to make a pretty prominent Stephen King film. I think he has a soft spot for the author, and I think he also sees a lot of the qualities that stand out in his work, while also kind of bypassing some of the cornier aspects that tend to negate, I think, some of his written work. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Just real quick, the brief overview of the film is that it's about 30 or 40 years after The Shining. Obviously, I mean, sorry, but this is a spoiler for The Shining. If you haven't seen the film, definitely check it out. But at the Overlook Hotel, there was this tragic incident where Danny Torrance's father, Jack Torrance, freezes to death. I believe that's the one we're going. The movie kind of keeps it vague, which what technically happened to Jack Torrance, if it's more like the books version of events, or if it's the movies. But it seems to be kind of going more towards the movie route, where basically he froze to death and he died when he was 5, and now he's being raised by his mother in Florida. And over the years, he's also developed an alcohol addiction, and he's kind of lost, even though, he has The Shining by his side. He hasn't quite managed to find a lot of virtues with adulthood. And through some turn of events, including some hat wearing villains that I won't get into too much detail about, he has to kind of return to his fears and remember and ultimately mentor a new generation of what would you call people who have the Shining shiners?
Shiners, yeah.
Shinies.
The shiny ones.
Yeah. Including a young girl who goes by the name of Abra, played by a young actress I'm not too familiar with. Do you know her name off the top of your head? It's Kaylee something.
Kaylee, if it wasn't right now, I could tell you. I just wrote a review on this the other day. Kaylee Curran.
There we go. And I should mention that Dan Torrance, played by Ewan McGregor as well. So that's just kind of a brief overview of the film. It's a little hard to describe it in full without getting into some spoilers, but just a general overview. Where'd you stand on Dr. Sleep, Cory?
I really liked it. I was thoroughly entertained. I think that once it gets past its first 30 minutes, which I think are kind of slow, but they build the atmosphere, which is very much a Mike Flanagan thing. He's a very atmospheric, slow burn type director. He's not like a get you on the first frame type. He's very much, wants to build his scene and his setting and his characters. And he's very confident in his pacing. He's going to do it his way, I think, in really anything that he does. And I think it really lends itself a little bit more successful for TV, honestly, at least for what I've seen of his work. But I think it's a really good, different movie. I think it is a polar opposite experience to watching The Shining, which I watched for the first time last year. I really liked it, but at the same time, it's that is a very, type A descent into madness, And again, it's very elemental horror. And I think that was Kubrick's, one of his great strengths, is that he really was great at, pulling away some of the more good versus evil themes and putting man kind of against nature, against himself, and obviously those very classic literary tropes. And he very much sided with nature, I think, in terms of he wasn't a very optimistic director towards us as people, I don't think at all.
Not really.
No, he didn't really like humanity. I think he loved nature. I think he believed in the power of the universe, I guess. But he didn't really believe in, man's ability to be able to reckon with it very well. And 2001 kind of deals with that in very aggressive ways of being maybe more positive, but also very negative at times. But in Doctor Strangelove, ultimately, his big, we're screwed type thing. And I don't always agree with how Kubrick looks at things as in a hypothetical sense, but obviously as a filmmaker, he was incredibly, incredibly talented, and The Shining is a wonderful horror film, but it's also a very unforgiving film. It's not a film there is some pathos, I think, but there's no emotional charge in. And I think that's why in part King didn't like it, is because obviously you can get into all the different reasons, but I think King's work has always dealt with good versus evil. I think that's always been the theme he's been interested in the most, and how man chooses to rise in the face of all of these malevolent forces, and no matter what they are, whatever monsters bump in his stories. But I think that Dr. Sleep obviously hymns way closer to a very classic good versus evil narrative. And I think that's why that even though it's basically, The Shining 2, these are just such different films. And I think that's the strength of Dr. Sleep, is that it's not trying to be The Shining 2, even though it basically is a direct sequel or a spirited sequel. Literally, that's kind of a fun pun, a spirited sequel, because it's a ghost. But
glad you caught that.
Yeah, thank you. You get a $5 bill for that one. Sure. But Warm Apple Night. But I think that by and large, it reminds me a lot of It Chapter 2. I think that it's a very big, large, Warner Brothers really wanted to roll the dice and just make a big production that's obviously paying a lot of tribute to, the original film, and, but at the same time, it wants to be its own thing. I think that it's a movie where it's I was engrossed. I was very engrossed with the story. I was very engrossed with what was happening, but it's not going to be my favorite movie of the year, but it's just one of those things where you're just kind of I really admire that Flanagan tried to make this as different as possible, because trying to make a sequel to The Shining just seems like such a bad idea. And even when King wrote Dr. Sleep earlier this decade, it just seemed like, are you really going back? Obviously, you don't need to go back to the Overlook Hotel. The Shining is a definitive story, and it's not a particularly optimistic one. But I think that King wanted to reclaim what Shine was, what it meant, and I think that's why that we have the work we do.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that it's kind of a tricky film for me, because I think the words that come to mind, when I think about it, are admirable and respectable. But I don't know if I'd quite call it a good film per se. But I think at the same time, I really, like you were saying, I really respect what Flanagan is able to accomplish here, because I do think 8 out of 10 times this would have just been a disaster. I think most directors would probably not do this well, or at least do it in a pretty good way that Flanagan does here. But to go to your earlier point, I haven't read Dr. Sleep. I have read The Shining. I read that recently before the film, and I didn't opt to rewatch The Shining just because I knew there were going to be a lot of callbacks to and references. I figured that the film kind of wants you to be more nostalgic for The Shining than to directly think about it in fresh memory. So I just figured that it'd probably be to my benefit to just have The Shining in the back of my mind as opposed to completely fresh again. But like you were saying, The Shining, it's not a good adaptation of a Stephen King novel because it deliberately goes against what he wrote. But it is, I think, one of the best films to be made from a Stephen King work, or to be borrowed from his material. But also, I think, just one of the best horror movies ever made. And I think it's a film that, this is a term that gets used a lot, that couldn't really be made again. But I think with The Shining, it fits because that was such a grueling, intense film to make that I don't think any studio would be willing to let a movie like that be made that way again. That's where we kind of get the stereotypes or the reputation of Stanley Kubrick doing 100 takes on a single shot, or he's very meticulous and everything has to be exact. It's a movie where, I don't know if you've heard, there are rumors that apparently like Shelley Duvall like ran out of tears because she had to cry so much between making the movie, like just like being scared and stuff all the time. It's just like a very intense movie for that reason, and it feels like very meticulous because like that's what it was like on set. Like it's just like he was just like, it has to be like this, and he it just like you kind of it lends itself to the film in that like he is just like Jack's like descent into madness is like basically everyone's descent into madness while making that movie. Because it's like 18 months of hell. But yeah, and in this film, obviously, I think Mike Flanagan's style is intentionally a lot more like, I guess, direct. Like, I think is, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what his shooting style is like, but it feels like it's a lot more controlled in the sense that, like, I think he is a little more straightforward. I think he doesn't quite try to go for like the mystique in the same way that Kubrick was with his film, but I do think at its best, this film is a fairly, like you said, kind of slow burn meditative film about the cyclical process of addiction as well as trauma and, you know, like the burden of like your family sins and kind of wrecking with like your past and, you know, how that kind of shapes your character and who you are. And I think those are the themes that were being presented in the book and what Stephen King wanted to address, because like you said, I think there is a part of him that kind of wants to have The Shining back, because The Shining is such a personal story for him. And that's kind of getting back to what we were saying earlier, where it's like, I think the reason he has such a chip on his shoulder about The Shining is because to him, that's like one of his most personal stories. It's basically, to simplify it to a significant degree, it's like his fear of, as an alcoholic, his fear of that he's like going to like basically black out and kill his family. Like that's like the core conceit of the book. And it's something that I think he has a little more benevolence for Jack Torrance in the book because he sees himself in Jack Torrance. And the movie is a lot more willing to just like throw him into the fire because it's like, it's going for something a little different where like, you know, like Stephen King wanted like the descent to kind of happen like gradually. Whereas like in the movie, it's like the first time you look at you look at Jack Torrance or Jack Nicholson, it's like, oh, that's a crazy person. Like he is insane. And it's just like waiting for like the firecracker to pop. And, you know, I think they both work fine. Like I think they have their merits. It's just that was just very much not what Stephen King wanted. And that's very much what Stanley Kubrick wanted. And my roundabout way of bringing this all up is that, like, I just don't think, like, these two are great at what they do, but I just don't think they had the same ideas here. Like, it's just like what they wanted was so polar opposite that I just don't think they're ever going to agree. And this movie is interesting in that, like, it's kind of trying to be like a bridge between the two in a way that I find kind of noble and sweet, but also counterproductive to its own good in that, without really getting into spoilers, like, I think the movie's pretty good about establishing its own tone and its own rhythm for like about 2 hours. It's about a 2.5 hour film. And it gets to a point where it's like, now we're at the Overlook Hotel. And this is like very reminiscent of that scene in Ready Player One, where it's like callbacks and references and recreations of shots. And some of it, like, I think there's a scene with Jack and Dan that I found really touching at the bar. And I think that was like, if it was more like that, I think I would have really dug this third act. But because it's so much a like nostalgia fest of like, you know, calling to this film and like revering to it enough, and that it kind of left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth for the second half of this film. And I think it kind of muted the emotional impact that I thought was building up pretty gradually and interesting throughout the film. So ultimately, I think I like the film overall, but I still have kind of mixed feelings about how it approaches its material.
Yeah, no, I think that's more than fair. I think that I was thinking about this, you know, while you were talking, it kind of jogged my memory, and there is this like entirely new, like post Forks Awakens, post Creed, like world of bringing these like iconic pop culture stories back in a very fan servicey way, but also trying to like make something out of it that is like high quality entertainment. And it feels like that we're hitting like a renaissance of that, where we're just having all of these, you know, actors coming back to these iconic performances.
Yeah. We just saw that with Terminator last week.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, Terminator Dark Fate, Helena Hamilton are unfortunately both back. I have not seen that yet, so I'm very curious to check it out. But yeah, there's like a ton of it. And I think that Doctor Sleep feels very Force Awakens-y, where it's trying to like, Do you remember this? Oh, you remember this? And you're like, yes. And then there's
Yeah.
like all the new stuff that's going on where it's like, and this is also good. You're like, oh, okay. And it's very safe, I would say. I mean, it's obviously
Yeah.
like, you're putting your chips down, and when you hear the score and you see the overlook, like part of me always wonders if that's just a bit disingenuous, because it's like, where is my affection going
Right.
exactly? Is it going to memory, or is it going to new experience? And I think
Mhm.
that sometimes it's hard to tell the difference, and sometimes that's part of the magic trick of why these movies are successful, is because like it's like they revive it in you. And obviously nostalgia is one of the biggest driving forces, even though this movie like is bombing at the box office in relative sense. I mean, I know that it didn't make, it was like a 45-50 million production, so not, they'll make their money back, but I mean, it's like it's losing to Midway this weekend.
Yeah.
So
Which I think honestly, just because they chose to release it like a week or two after Halloween,
yeah, I think
which makes no sense.
well, I guess they were trying to keep Joker and it apart.
I figured that's the case, but yeah, it
Yeah,
just was like, I think it was that, and they also wanted it to be separated pretty far from it chapter 2, but
yeah, that's also a good point. And then they gives that time to put the Doctor Sleep trailer on it. And obviously, Chapter 2 made a lot of money, but not
mhm.
quite as much as you would have thought, which is interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. It's that, and I think also like just people like see it as like a successor, but not really like a sequel to The Shining, because like
Mhm.
obviously nobody from the original Shining is involved with this, so it's just like, it's
Yeah, they
like,
didn't like call it like Shining Doctor Sleep, or the Shining
right,
turn.
yeah, it's just like
Yeah,
people like obviously like all the iconography and imagery and stuff is like harkening to it, but it's not like, I don't think, I have no one I've talked to is really just like, oh, like can't believe they made a sequel to The Shining. It's like, oh, I guess they did like The Shining again.
and also like this is an interesting. I mean, obviously, I think The Shining is a very like people know what it is, but do you think that film is like necessarily like translating with their moviegoers? Like, do you think people still revisit it, or like,
I mean, among people my age, yes, I can't speak for the younger generation, but it's,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. I just think yeah, I think there is still something to like just how like intense and like unsettling it is. I think still resonates with the younger audience, but it is a film that requires, I think, a little bit more patience than maybe some people are willing to give it.
yeah, I think it's definitely like it's still like in that list of like horror films you must watch, like 10, and like all these like random internet websites. Like The Shining will always come up, but yeah, I think with what Flanagan was doing here, it's a very popcorn, more like good versus evil,
Mm-hmm.
straightforward narrative, which I think makes it very entertaining. And I think that Flanagan's a very good genre filmmaker, and I thought some of his decisions were really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that they did a really nice job of with the villain work. I thought that this film had a very intimidating sheen to it, with how it just like, kind of dealt with the more malevolent themes it wanted to. Rebecca
Mm-hmm.
Hall and Rebecca Ferguson in
So I was
this,
gonna say, yeah, Rebecca Ferguson.
she's great. I mean, she's really, really great.
Yeah, she was
And
cool.
it was a really, really interesting kind of way of portraying that character. But I guess we'll do spoiler talk here in a little bit. But
Yeah, if you want.
yeah, I really I liked this. I kind of liked this like I liked it chapter 2. Like I was thoroughly entertained. I For a 2.5 hour movie, like I didn't feel the runtime quite as much. Like there's like a lane this is in, and it's not like a lane that's like screams great movie, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, yeah, I really enjoyed this. I thought this was good. I thought it dealt with interesting themes and has good performances. Like it's just a very down the middle good adaptation of
Mm-hmm.
some of King's themes. And obviously, I'm happy for the director, for Flanagan and for King, that they kind of found their own feng shui on it. Because King was very vocal that he really likes this movie, that it's a really good adaptation of what he wanted to do, and that gives you happiness that there's some closure there. I guess that maybe he feels like that the story has a movie that, at least in his eyes, is proper, but
Yeah.
maybe the downplay is that it's just nowhere near. And obviously, I think that the biggest thing to say is this film is nowhere near like the quality of The Shining
Mm-hmm.
original.
Right. And I mean, to be fair, like I never went into this like, oh, it's going to be the next Shining.
Oh
And
yeah,
I think it's foolhardy to even assume that it's going to be that.
oh, absolutely.
But yeah, I'm mostly in agreement with you. The only thing I disagree with is I did feel the length. I think Like I think it could have trimmed about like 20 minutes off and not really lost that much. Like I think it didn't really need to be 2.5 hours. Like, I think it could have been fine to 2 and gotten its point across. Like nothing particularly made it seem worthy of the 2.5 hour length, especially because it's, like you said, kind of a slower burn film. But yeah, like I think it's like a handsomely made film. Like, obviously I think we've established that Mike Flanagan knows what he's doing. I think he's a very competent filmmaker. And I think there is something fairly admirable about his attempt to kind of like bring his like two loves together, like his deep appreciation for Kubrick and obviously his immense respect for Stephen King. He's just like, let's grab lunch, let's be friends. Like that's like he's like trying to be like the friend in between that's like trying to get these two forces together. But I think at the same time that comes at the sacrifice of his own film, where it doesn't really have its own identity in the way that I feel like Stanley Kubrick's film is just so much a Stanley Kubrick film. Like it's undeniable that it's him and it's his work. This one just felt like it like you said, it does feel like more like a studio effort, in the way that I found it Chapter 2 to be kind of a studio driven film, even though it had a pretty prominent filmmaker at the forefront of that as well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, definitely when I thought back upon, it Chapter 2 and, another Stephen King adaptation from earlier this year, Pet Sematary, I found myself growing more negative on those films as I thought about them. And this one, it's still fairly fresh in my mind, so I don't know if it's going to have the same impact, but I feel like this is probably the one of those three that I've liked the most, but I still have kind of the same reservations I had with those films, where I just don't think they have quite the sticking power that I was kind of hoping they would, and that like their predecessors, I think they're a little more remembered than their newer contemporaries. But yeah, I mean, it's a solid film. I think we also should bring up like the production design is pretty incredible. Especially when they try to recreate a lot of the scenes and sets from The Shining. It's pretty amazing what they're able to do. And yeah, it's a solid little film, but I'd give it, before we get into spoilers, we'll just briefly, I'll give it a firm B-. I think it has its flaws, but I enjoyed it by and large, and think it's worth a watch if you're a fan of King or Stanley Kubrick's film.
Yeah, no, I think that's more than fair. It's like a movie where there's just not a lot I have against it. It's not a movie that I'm like jumping up and down to watch again necessarily. So I think I'd probably go B plus range, like in the middle of whatever is like a B half plus, I guess. I think I wish there was like a grade between B plus and B. Like give it like a B with like a plus that's not quite finished, which feels like a grade.
You're gonna make a new grade?
Yeah, it's called B half plus.
B half plus, all right.
Yeah, it's like a solid like 87, 88. Out of 90. Like I'm there with it. I liked it a lot. It's a movie that I would definitely watch again. It's got some really nice stuff. I feel the same way about it like I did, maybe just a little bit less after I finished Hill House, where I was like, it's a thoroughly captivating emotional story. It plays into more of the sensibilities that I like in horror films, and this may sound kind of more like a less gritty, horror fan, but I do enjoy when horror kind of deals with real world themes and pathos.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Kind of leaves me feeling good in the end. I know that's not always the result of a horror film. Sometimes you're not supposed to feel good, but and I've seen great horror movies where I do not feel great, but I do enjoy like movies like The Babadook. Like that's my favorite example of this, where I really do feel like there's an emotional story where a character is growing in these terrifying circumstances, and I think that that's more of what this film is. So I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're a Shining fan. I would love to know what Lee Unkrich thinks about this movie, because obviously he's like the world's biggest Shining fan, and I think
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, that's who we need to get on the podcast next to really break this down.
Did you want to do a spoiler section, or
maybe just like for half a second, because I think that there's some like legitimate like gigantic spoilery stuff that people would get ticked about if they found out that we were talking about it.
Sure. Better safe than sorry, I'd say. Real quick, we're just going to do a quick spoiler section starting now.
Okay. Dick Halloran is back. That was a fascinating decision.
Yeah. That was not one I was, well, I can't say I was surprised, but I mean, it was something that was interesting. I do think it is intriguing that this film opts not to do any de-aging or like CG. Like they any of the characters who are in The Shining are all new actors that just kind of look a little similar to the previous actors. But yeah, that was I thought those scenes were pretty effective with I don't know who the actor was, but the guy who played Dick I thought was he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I liked it. I thought that was a nice tie back, and I thought that was one of the better parts of this film. Is that's the kind of like connective tissue I thought was strong. I thought the third act in the house was a little, and I mean, the house though.
The hotel,
that's iconic filming places. I call it a house. That's the one part of the movie where it felt a little on the nose. Like, well, I was excited to see the build up, and that was a really cool recreation, but it also kind of felt like, I don't know, very much like, okay, this is the stamp they're going for, I guess.
Yeah. And that's what I was talking about earlier. It's just like, I don't know. I mean, maybe that was the studio being like, we have to do this. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's possible because, you know, this is a Warner Bros. Film, and also, Ready Player One was also a Warner Bros. Film, and they did kind of a similar thing. So, I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't want to put blame on any one person because I just don't know. But yeah, I mean, with the exception of like I said, I mean, I really enjoyed that bar scene with Jack and Dan. I thought that was like a good way to kind of, you know, play to the nostalgia of the original film while also adding more of Mike Flanagan's touch and his the thematics that he likes to bring to his films and projects. And you know, there is a thrill I got when, like, you know, they do the score and like they do like that like camera, like whatever, that like swing where it's like in like the lake and it's like leading up to them on the mountains. That's like the opening for The Shining. You know, there's a thrill I get seeing a recreation of that. But the rest of it, yeah, I just found it, you know, like either groan worthy or just kind of tiring. It's just like, yeah, okay, well, now we gotta do like his face in the door, and like, you know, the twins are here, of course, because we can't have that. And like, there's the axe, and it's like, there's a typewriter, and it's just, yeah.
How many times were we gonna get the lady in the bathtub? She was in the movie.
Too. They really kind of got their money's worth with her. It was, I mean, I thought it was cool at the end with the last shot, but otherwise, yeah, it was just like, okay, we get it. You're kind of taken away from what was so effective about her in the first movie, but
yeah, that's a terrifying design. I mean, that's why that scene has just always been like, but like, she just, I don't know, she just, every time she would pop in and be like, oh, hello.
Oh, don't forget, I'm here.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
But,
yeah.
The Tremblay scene, that still, to me, that legitimately was upsetting. I mean, it was just like, and I think that's one of the villains to me in this actually were really strong. I thought that Rose the Hat was a menacing figure. Whatever Rebecca Ferguson was doing with her face bothered me. I mean, I've not seen a smile like that made me not smile in quite some time. But I didn't know that Jacob Tremblay was in this until like when he popped up. I was like, oh my gosh, is that Jacob Tremblay? And you know, not to be too, you know, explanatory, but he obviously doesn't make it, and his death is.
You can say in spoilers.
Yeah, I mean, he dies and he gets murdered in a very gruesome way, and they don't really show. They kind of do it in a dignified way to where it doesn't feel like really exploitive, but it's obviously a very upsetting scene. And obviously the crux of these villains is that they're kind of shine vampires, I guess. They just kind of suck the shine out of people that have it, and they have to do it by like hurting people, and they like hurt people. Like the thing, it's very upsetting, like, you know, vista to have. But
yeah, I mean, there's probably something to be said, like exploiting the youth and like taking their essence and stuff, and it's like probably saying some more stuff that is relevant to today. But I
will say, I don't know if you caught this, but did you see the parallels between this and Monsters Inc?
In what sense?
Well, it's like there's like those canisters. They would.
Okay, yeah.
This is like they're fueling themselves with the screams of children, and there's one scene where it's like she like went to the canister and I leaned over and like, this is very eerily reminiscent of Monsters Inc. So, and obviously they don't just like find laughter as the best medicine at the end.
Unfortunately,
no, I thought that there was a whole, that scene in particular to me was very effective in terms of making you be like, oh my gosh, they really are not messing around. Like we're gonna feel some of that darkness that the original film had, but No, the villains to me were some of the best parts about it. I appreciated that there was a sincere threat and it wasn't just like, the slow build of the atmosphere closing in on the people like it was in the original Shining. I think that this film needed to have a central, like, bad force that we could see, that we could figure out. Did you watch Fargo at all on FX? The TV
I've
show?
seen all 3 seasons. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Hanzi is in this, which I think was fascinating. I didn't realize that that was him until I looked it up afterward. But he does a nice job, I thought. So that, I guess there's the villains are a little spoilery because you do have to talk about like what they do, why they're doing it, and they haven't really spoiled that a ton in the marketing. But how did
a little bit? Yeah, I mean they show them like like the soul sucking and stuff. So.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, how did you feel about the little plot move at the end where they would, where obviously Rose the Hat meets her just desserts? Did you like the way that kind of played out? Did you like the way of Danny's fate? I mean, what did you think about?
It was fine. Yeah, I mean, like satisfying in that, like, like they set it up and then she got her comeuppance and stuff. And I do think they were like some of the imagery of it was pretty cool as far as like that one, like the hand, like going through the face.
Yeah.
Like I thought it was like, like I don't really see that a lot and it was pretty cool. But, like after that, just like continued on. It was just like, still more references to The Shining and just like, okay, we get it. We're in the Overlook, but it's just like, cause it's like they have like the thing in the maze and it's like, okay, fine. We're going to have it in the maze. And it's just like, nope, we're still doing it. Now we got to recreate the stair thing with the axe. And it's like, okay, fine. We're going to do this now. And then it's like, nope, we're still not done. We got to bring the twins in and everyone else. That was what, it's just like, I'm
surprised the movie didn't end with like a slow look at well, don't they use the song from the end of The Shining at the end of this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same music. But I'm surprised they didn't do like a look at her like yearbook or something. It's like, whoa.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is like, I think they wanted to avoid being it like directly because that's like something that Stanley Kubrick added and like the film kind of goes to painstaking lengths to recreate the actual ending of the book, which is blowing up the hotel.
Yeah.
Which is how Stephen King wanted the thing to end. So like that was it, like I said, ultimately this is more of a Stephen King adaptation than a Kubrick sequel, which is fine. But, at the same time, it's just like its inability to kind of form its own identity in the midst of respecting these two legends, I think takes away from what could have been a little more individualistic about it. But, I do think I agree with you about the villains in that, like, I think they could have easily just been like a disposable force at the film. And I do feel like there was like genuine menace that was portrayed throughout their existence. My only thing with them is that like somehow like Dan Torrance is like an ace shooter and they never established that. Like he just like can somehow like shoot point blank on range from far distances. Like they established the other guy was a hunter, but like when they had the shootout, I mean, it's just kind of weird that he was just like a great shooter that wasn't set up before, but that's, I guess, kind of a nitpick. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else spoiler wise you want to talk about?
Nothing too major. Okay. I mean, I thought it was interesting how they killed his mom or let her die. I mean, with the, I don't know, I wasn't
Shelley
expecting.
Duvall?
Or
Wendy, you mean? Yeah.
How did you feel about the CGI or how the actress that recreated her? I thought that was.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of going to what I was saying earlier. Is I'm glad they didn't do. Well, part of me is glad that they didn't do like a de-aging recreation of Shelley Duvall.
Yeah, I think that would have been in very poor taste considering everything.
Yeah, like no Princess Leia thing. But at the same time, I kind of wanted that for Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Because
like, fun.
Because the guy kind of looks like Jack Nicholson, but like not enough at the same time.
Did you know who that was?
Who was it? Jack Nicholson's like son or something?
That's what I was thinking at first. That was Henry Thomas.
Wait, you gotta remind me. That name sounds familiar, but
that's Elliot from E.T.
Oh yeah, huh.
Yeah, who's also the dad in the flashback sequences on Haunting of Hill. Yeah, Elliot's still working.
Good for him.
Yeah. E.T.'s not in this though. He's nowhere to be found.
Yeah, maybe it's for the best that E.T.'s not.
Probably his career.
I don't know if he would have made it out alive.
No, he just after doing Ocean's 13, he just kind of his career's kind of fallen off.
That would be funny though if he's like, his like glowing finger is like E.T. phone home, and then like little Jack like red rum.
They like touch, and it's just like,
Yeah.
does E.T. like lose his shine if that happens? Because it literally is like shining.
I don't know, but yeah.
Oh,
Anyway, let's talk Last Christmas.
let's do it.
So this is going to be an interesting discussion because I know already where you stand on this and where I stand on it. But anyway, so Last Christmas is the I think first Christmas movie written by Emma Thompson, and is there a husband that co-wrote it?
Maybe.
I know she wrote it with somebody else, but it's like Emma Thompson is the writer, and she also acts in the film. And this film is directed by Paul Feig, who people probably know from his work. He did Bridesmaids, the Ghostbusters 2016 film. What else did he do? Spy, yeah. The Heat, and he also most recently, I was gonna say, Simple Favor. Which Simple Favor in this kind of show that I think he's trying to kind of, I guess to an extent, Ghostbusters too, that he's trying to kind of get away from like the art, like being only known for like raunchy R-rated comedies. Like I think he's trying to push himself into kind of more broader territories where he can kind of, obviously still women led and written films, but he also kind of wants to expand his genre scope, and somehow that led to him being involved with this fairly sweet seeming Christmas movie, but one that also leaves me a bit baffled in the scheme of things. And I don't know if we have to do a spoiler discussion for this film as well, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. The general gist of the plot is Amelia Clarke plays a girl named Kate who works at a Christmas store with a woman named Santa, who is played by what's her name?
Michelle Yeoh.
There you go. Who's great. She had a heart condition. She has also had a series of medical issues throughout the years. She's returning to health, but she's not really taking advantage of it. She's drinking a lot. She is a bit directionless. She's having trouble finding herself in any one living space because she tends to find herself in situations where she messes up her friends' lives. And so she's kind of in a tailspin in terms of her life. And she finds herself having quite a few chance encounters with Henry Golding's character, who, seems like he's like almost like a manic pixie dream boy. Like he just basically kind of comes out of nowhere. It says all of the right things, creates like the perfect evenings and stuff like that. And through their kind of meet cute relationship, she becomes a little bit of a more well-rounded person. But as you may or may not have heard, there's a bit of a twist throughout the film that it was one of those things where it's like, I almost found the twist cute in that it really just like went there in a way that was like, surely they're not going to just do this. Like, and it's just like, they did. It's like, that's exactly what they're doing. And it's just like, all right, that's your choice. But it's also like, I'm really confused as to like why everyone involved made this movie. Like, I mean, like if they just wanted to celebrate Christmas spirit, it's fine. But it just seems like the type of film that like would normally be on Netflix beside like The Night Before Christmas, the Vanessa Hudgens one that's coming out pretty soon, or like a Hallmark thing or like a Freeform thing, but it's like a little bit better because it has like a great writer, like an award-winning writer, and like a proven director and like a top-notch cast. But like the premise is like literally adapting a George Michael song to a film, and I don't know, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. But Cory, why don't you tell them how you felt about the film?
Well, that's a fascinating question. My thoughts on this film actually take me back to the year 2013.
Okay.
When a college film critic, Cory Woodroof, went to a press screening for the M. Night Shyamalan film After Earth.
Okay.
And I thoroughly enjoyed that movie. I thought it was really good. I'm like, oh man, Shyamalan's back. and I wrote my review, and I didn't talk to any movie critics after I saw it. And I remember I posted it right at the embargo, and I stayed up to see what the reviews were going to be like. And they were not what I expected them to be at all. Obviously, that film was critically panned and flopped hard. A lot of the things I liked about it were things that people hated about it. Um, and I had not really had a. Usually, I'm kind of not in like the main. I don't know. I'm usually pretty well with the consensus. Admittedly, I mean, usually if I like something that's good, I don't like something that's bad. Like I'm not that hard to pick out. But sometimes I have weird opinions, and I guess my weird side of my opinionating hits me with this film because I thought it was really good for like most of its runtime. I thought it was a really effective, simple kind of rom-com about a person that's and a really appreciatingly non-judgmental film. I feel like in so many of these movies, the character that Emilia Clarke plays just does not always get the respect for her base humanity, and it's like the guy has to come along and fixes her, but it's like in this film Henry Golding's character is more nudging her to be the person she is and not trying to transform her into something that she hasn't been. And I thought that Paul Feig, I think, is one of still the best directors that's working to frame women in stories like this. And I really appreciate the way that he allows stories that are, driven by women to be able to just kind of, not be constrained to a lot of the plot things at times that have held people back in the past because they haven't had a person that was mindful of, the things that allow these films to feel special in a hypothetical sense, to really guide it. And the long story short of saying that is just like this film felt very human to me. I think that's why I appreciated it. It felt like a really good human story, which is why the twist that happens kind of is. When I look back on it, it's like, I get it. I get what they're going for, but I felt like that this film could have made one gigantic decision and would have wiped out a lot of the things that people didn't like about it if they just hadn't done this one thing. But it's a little messy around the edges when you look back. It left me with a great feeling that I don't think can last. Like sure. It's the Christmas spirit. Obviously,
it's a Christmas film for the season. Yeah,
and one of the things I really liked about it is it's a film that takes the idea of Christmas and puts it into a communal goodwill sense, and that to me was very refreshing because we don't see a lot of Christmas movies that really deal with like Christmas as a time of charity. And one of the big plot points in the film is that Emilia Clarke's character begins to like volunteer at a homeless shelter and like perform. She's a musician or a singer, so sings on the sidewalk, and they're very basic acts of goodwill, but they kind of show that she deep down is like trying to change and be better because she's kind of in a bad, she's a bit of an unreliable, person, I guess, to people in her life, and she learns to better appreciate them and be more open-minded to doing good things for other people again, like I guess she was beforehand. But I think that's the film's strength to me. I think it's a very well-made movie, and I loved the leads. I thought that Emilia Clarke and Henry Golding really were a nice match together, and I believed their chemistry. The interesting thing about Golding's character, and obviously the twist makes it even more so a conversation of like wondering everything about it, but he felt very, I don't know. I think it's the Pride and Prejudice archetype of a dude in a movie like this. Like obviously he's the supreme gentleman, like he says all the right things. The only time he really doesn't do something is when he's trying to. And there's an entire conversation about, is that an accurate representation? Do we need representations like this in film? Do we need to put people to this high standards? And how do you balance that off of just someone being a nice gentleman and treating someone well? Like it's a very complex conversation that does not need to be had on the film Last Christmas, but sure. Just being honest, but there doesn't need to be any major social themes to come out of this film. It's nice, but I was very charmed by it. I kind of made like a really kind of a funny tweet, like, is this going to wind up being one of my favorite films of the year? Because I haven't really left a lot of movies this year that have made me feel like this, where I was just thoroughly entertained, big crowd pleaser, and this reminded me, because of Henry Golding, of what I felt after I watched Crazy Rich Asians, and Michelle Yeoh's in it too. Mm-hmm. Like I think both of them are really good in everything that they do. But I don't know. I got that really big, broad crowd pleaser sense from it, and I wonder if this film will translate better with a general audience than it does with critics. Maybe
Probably.
folks that, and I don't mean this to like be like critics, but like
No, I get.
a bit more open minded. I think to the twist that happens, and the Brexit commentary in this is a little reckless. Now that I think back on it,
Yeah, I
they
was gonna
do
bring
try
that
to
up.
like deal with Brexit in a very odd way, and I think that this was
Well,
Emma Thompson. Like, go ahead, because
yeah,
I think
no,
yeah,
I mean, with regards to the Brexit stuff, it just like it feels very ham-fisted into the story. Like
that's fair.
I'd be fine with it if it was a little more graceful with it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I mean, they try to with like obviously like they make, a lot like our main character is an immigrant in the story, and it's just like there's hints to it, like it takes place in like 2017, and it's just like like they allude to it a lot, but like the actual scenes where they address it are just very yeah, like you said, kind of on the nose, over the top in a way that I think they mean well. Like it's hard to not agree with what they're trying to say, but it's just like the way they go about it is maybe not reckless in my view, but just kind of there's I think a better, more graceful way of handling it, and the movie opted not to do that. And I think that maybe it'll hit home for more people the way they approach it in here, but for me it just made it seem a little cloying, and I guess a little verging on melodrama in a way that wasn't really my speed in that regard.
Yeah, and the one thing I really didn't like about this movie is Thompson's character herself. I don't
Oh
know
yeah,
why these people had to be from Yugoslavia. I don't.
her accent is a choice.
Yeah, it's very much a choice. It's not quite a choice like Meryl Streep playing a Pomeranian
Oh
woman
no,
was in the
I'm
laundromat.
not saying they're similar, yeah, but it's just like
Yeah,
they're
they're
both
very.
choices in different ways. Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know. There's like a similar thing of
Yeah.
like maybe you didn't need to play an ethnicity that you don't have any connection to,
Yeah,
even if
that's
it's like
true.
European based. Like I
Yeah.
don't know. It's not like that whole subplot felt. I think the movie Galaxy brains itself a little bit. Like I think it tries to overthink what its characters need to be doing and what
Yeah.
their background is. It's like no, you didn't need to be Yugoslavian refugees. Like you could have done this and everything be fine without a lot
Yeah.
of the you
I
know.
yeah.
I don't know. It just the movie I think kind of overworks itself at times and tries to do too much when I think that it's got a very innocent charm and a very buoyant cast and spirit to it that I don't think needed as much like Rigmarole, and I think that's part of why the twist just to me is completely pointless because this film can go without the twist and I think end up in a much better place than it does, even though
I
I
agree with
still
that.
really like it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Brexit stuff was probably, Emma Thompson and her co-writer being
Yeah.
like, well, it has to be more than that. Like,
Mhm.
surely, because like in their view, it's like, well, if we don't have this, then we just made a like Hallmark movie. Like, we have to do something to, make this politically important or, have more social relevance, which is fine. I appreciate the effort to kind of expand the material in a way that, hits a little closer to home and has a little more social commentary in play. But yeah, it just doesn't, I just don't think they're very graceful about it. And I think the message is strong and it's valid and something that's worth saying. But I also think it, I think if they written it a little more gracefully into the narrative, it might have hit home more, but it's just like out of nowhere, it's just like, yeah, let's talk about Brexit. And it's like,
Might as well.
it's like, I thought we were celebrating Christmas. We talking about Brexit now? All right. Yeah, but to your earlier point, I will say that I don't think the reviews for this one are quite as negative as After Earth. I think it currently has like a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I think it's like a lot of people are agreeing with you, and I think quite a few people are ultimately going to agree with what I have to say about the film,
Oh, yeah.
which is that I want to be there with you. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, I have no like strong negative feelings for this film. It's a very sweet, charming film by design. Like, it's trying to be very nice. It wants people to feel good. It's just like, hey, let's have fun with the holidays. And it's like, it's hard to get mad at a movie like that. Cause that's like such a like tender, innocent approach for a film. And like I said, I think Paul Feig and Emma Thompson, they have their hearts in the right place with this. Like, from what I can tell, like Paul Feig seems like a very nice guy. Like, I think he wants to make more like nice movies like this. I'm fine with what he wants to do here. Like, I think there is like a value to having a film like this be in theaters, because it's very rare that we like most of it's just this is typically something that's like just dumped on Netflix, and like, you know, like people see it or they don't, and there's a little more grandeur having it in theaters and stuff, even though I don't think Paul Feig's directorial style is particularly flashy or cinematic in any respect.
Oh no, very much not.
Yeah. But ultimately though, for as much as I appreciate its tender earnestness, I just found it pretty bland in a way that I'm obviously not expecting this to be It's a Wonderful Life or anything, or A Miracle on 34th Street, or even Love Actually, but
or the 2000 Grinch.
What was that?
Or the 2000 Grinch.
Well, I might put it, I don't know. But the thing is that, like, I feel like 2000 Grinch, for all its faults, like, I will remember that film for life.
Oh yeah, I will too. I don't know
if I'm gonna remember Past Christmas. Yeah. So for me, it's like, I don't mind the schmaltz. Like, I don't mind that it's cutesy. I don't mind that it just wants to be a kind of, straightforward, goofy Christmas movie with a big heart that's, just wants to please people and stuff like that. For me, I just think it's kind of at a crossroads where it's like, it's too sentimental to kind of have like some like knowing subversion with the premise in a way that I think we would typically expect from Paul Feig and Emma Thompson, where it's like, I think there is something that's weirdly very straightforward about this film, where like, I don't think we see like what they usually bring to like satirize or kind of comment on the genre in a way that like Paul Feig did with, A Simple Favor, or even like his earlier films, like with Spy and Bridesmaids, and even the Heat, which is a movie I don't particularly like, but he was, you know, commenting on a genre and like how women are often represented in there, or often not represented in there. It just felt like it was just kind of a straightforward Christmas movie, and that it was just kind of being like mushy and putty, and it's just like, yeah, okay. I'd be fine with that if it wasn't also like kind of like already in love with its wit and it's like in its own kind of approved charms, that I didn't really find the like bleeding heart sincerity of it to be fully formed in a way that I think I would have been more willing to be won over by the film if it had been, I think, a little more earnest or a little more subversive. And to me, it's just kind of somewhere in the middle in a way that made it a bit underwhelming of an experience.
Do we need to talk about the twist? I mean, I feel like people are gonna, I don't know how many people are actually gonna see this.
That's the thing. It's like, I feel funny doing a spoiler talk for Last Christmas. And here's the thing. It's like, you can find the twist online. If you look hard enough, you'll find it.
You probably know what it is.
Yeah, at this point, that's the thing. It's like, I'm terrible at guessing twist, but this movie is just like, as soon as like Henry Golding's character and like, it's weird that blank.
Yeah.
Well, give it away.
Yeah, I'll just say it is a direct adaptation of the song.
Right, yeah.
You really like,
and then they're like,
the song. And,
yeah.
I think the movie in retrospect would have been a lot stronger if it had not played that card.
Yeah.
If a certain someone hadn't done something and would have been somewhere at a certain point in that movie, that it would have been in a better place for where it was.
I think
because you can't think about it at all, because when you think about what happens for the rest of that movie, and then you go back and think about the whole movie as a whole, and you're like, wait a second, how does this now happen? How does this now work out? The movie makes no logical sense. I mean, there are moments where you're just like, I don't know, there's a plot point involving a cell phone, and you're just kind of like, hold on a second, how did this get here if this is there? And I understand it comes from a very tender, sweet place, and I thought that it worked for me in the moment a lot, but it's just like one of those movies where, like, as much as I hate the idea of cinema sins and that idea of looking at film and just pointing out mistakes to point them out.
I mean, I'm not a huge Richard Curtis fan, but I generally think his stuff's fine. I think this movie might have worked better if he was involved with it. Like, I think his approach would have made it work a little better for me, but as it stands, it's fine. Like, I'm not mad about it. Like I said, it is what it is. I agree with you. I think it is going to be a crowd pleaser. I think it's going to do well with audiences. And I could see this one playing on, like, freeform in their like 25 days of Christmas or whatever, and pretty frequent rotation for the next couple Christmases and beyond. And if that's, if people get something out of it for that reason, more power to them. For me, it's about I'm between a C and a C minus. I'll give it a high C minus.
Okay, a high C minus. We're making grades out of the woodworks here.
Yeah.
Cinemaholic. Honestly, I'll go B plus. I really liked it. This is a major guilty pleasure for me, and I think the biggest reason I liked it so much is because of Clarke and Golding. I think that they are both splendid in this. I think Emilia Clarke showed a lot of really impressive range.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, that's I was gonna say I meant to mention that earlier, but I think Emilia Clarke is really great in this, and I would like to see more performances like this from her.
Yeah, and I'm really happy for her because I'm not a Game of Thrones person, but it just sounds like she might have gotten the short end of the stick on how all that ended up in terms of her character development. And, people who watch the show, I'm sure the performance is, as standardly good as people have said it has been. But, she seems like a really sweet person that obviously had some health scares herself.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting kind of comparison there.
Yeah, and the fact that the story kind of spoke to her. She's been really interesting talking about the spoiler culture on the internet and how people are ruining the movie for other people, how they don't need to do that. And she's very outspoken and is defending this work, and I admire that because this is a movie that works better if you kind of figure what's going out, but if the moment happens, it does what it's trying to do. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's a movie that I guess is more of a guilty pleasure for me than I didn't think I'd be saying that as soon as it was over. I'm like, oh, everyone's going to enjoy this. And then I talked to people after my screening and I said, no, they're not. But, I'd be curious to revisit it. I might try to take my fiance to see it. So I'm going to give it another shot maybe and see how it holds up one of these days. Cause it feels like a good light breezy movie to put on. And I think it'll be on TV a bunch whenever it cycles onto cable. So
right, that's what, yeah.
I think that there are things that hold it back from being a legitimately great film, of course, obviously, but for what it is, I liked it a lot more than I didn't. So I'll definitely be in its corner. I'll give it a good mark.
All right, and that's fair. That's respectable. I mean, I wish I was on that page, but unfortunately, I'm a bit of a Scrooge, a Grouch, a Grinch.
Bah humbug.
Bah humbug. Yes. Real quick, I'm just going to talk about, I also saw Playing with Fire, which is the new film, un film de Andy Finkman, a regular auteur of the genre. Andy Finkman, I'd be shocked if you know that name directly, listener, but if you don't, or if you do, kudos to you, I guess.
He's the Stephen Brill of family entertainment.
Yeah, he has made a lot of stuff with like Kevin James, like he was involved with Kevin Can Wait. He did Paul Blart Mall Cop 2. He's also been involved with a lot of Disney stuff, like The Game Plan, Race Witch Mountain, Parental Guidance. Actually, I think it was a Fox film before they got bought out. So I guess
I will say though, maybe his first movie he ever did. Well, maybe it was like first or second. That
Reefer
She's
Madness?
the Man.
Oh, okay.
She's the Man has a lot of. I can't tell if it's a regular people's movie or if it actually is like underappreciated comedy from.
A lot of people do like it, yeah.
But yeah, no, it had a really big following. It has like I guess it would qualify as a cult film. I mean, it definitely has developed a bit of a cult status. I just don't know if that's with like film people or like it was like a movie that was passed around on DVD a bunch and kind of like a general audience taste.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gotten kind of a similar reputation as like 10 Things I Hate About You, but I think not quite as fond. Like people are a little more fond, I think, of 10 Things I Hate About You. Whereas, like you said, I think She's a Man kind of falls somewhere between like genuine appreciation and guilty pleasure. It's like somewhere between there. But his newest film is Playing with Fire. I don't know what you really want me to say about this. It's just like John Cena. It has to basically be a surrogate dad. He is a not quite a firefighter, but like what do you call it? I don't know, like the people who like have to get water from like the lakes and like put in on the houses and stuff. I don't know what they call it, like on the helicopters. I don't know what their names are. Fire marshals, I think, or something.
Yeah, they're like I don't know. I feel like this was explained in the film Planes to Fire and Rescue. I'm trying to remember.
It doesn't matter. I mean, not that like their profession is obviously important, but just for the, like in the scheme of the films, like they're like advanced firefighters for like for unfortunately a lack of a better term.
They're like rescue heroes. I guess if you're going for
which is a very it's a great noble profession that is not given the dignity or respect it deserves in this movie. In any case, there's a house that's burning down. They rescue 3 children from the burning building, and they have this, like, I forget what they call it. Something law where it's like, because their parents can't reach them at that point, like they have to like be stationed in the firehouse until the parents get there. And then like the kids are disorderly and, act a fool for about 90 minutes. And that's the source of the comedy of the film.
Hijinks ensue.
Hijinks ensue indeed. And, here's the thing about Playing with Fire. It's obviously a bad film. Like, I'm not going to say it's, anything worthy of merit or discussion. That's why I'm trying to wrap up this conversation fairly quickly because we're going a little longer than I anticipated. But I will say that there is something about this film while I was watching it that even though it's bad in a very kind of retroactively bland, generic sort of way, there is something also quaint about how generically bland and bad it is in that, like, I feel like there was a time, like, I would say probably 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago, where like movies like this would be like every 4 months or maybe every 6 months or something. Like we'd get a movie like this, like Disney would produce it. It would be like The Pacifier or, The Game Plan. Like I said, Andy Finkman's other film. And, it would usually make a decent amount of money. And then, it was kind of, quick and cheap to make. And, it did what it intended to do, and it didn't always get good. These movies didn't get good reviews per se, but they made a tidy profit. And then, I think in the scheme of things with like Marvel and different things, like these kind of movies went, under the rug, probably for the best, just in this case at least. But, like in the sense that like this type of film that we usually don't get much of anymore. And it's not like Marriage Story where we need to save it and preserve it. We're fine if we don't get another Playing with Fire. And
speak for yourself.
Yeah, that's true. But I will say that by that measure, I guess there is something about this film that's almost kind of quaint and nearly charming in that they're still making movies like this in 2019. Mm-hmm. And they still star wrestlers that should be doing better things by now. And like I said, The Rock has a Game Plan. He also has like the Tooth Fairy. Mr. Nanny was the Hulkster. And then,
the Pacifier with Vin Diesel.
Right. But he will be an honorary wrestler in this case.
That's right.
And then we have, what's his face? Dave Bautista has one, right? My Spy.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what it is about wrestlers. Like, is it something in their contract where it's like, if you get so big, you have to do a degrading kids film just so you can keep your ego in check? I like to believe that's the case because, like, looking at that, like, Fast and Furious set thing where it's, like, the competing egos for Vin Diesel and The Rock and, like, Jason Statham and stuff where they have to, like, keep their manhood in check for the sake of their cinematic presentation. I wonder, maybe The Rock would kind of, maybe he might have a better sense of humor about himself if he was forced to make Tooth Fairy 2. And I was like, I'm lucky to be making these blockbusters.
That's right.
I could be doing a lot worse. And maybe that's what's happening.
Stone Cold Steve Austin has not quite gone into the subgenre yet.
No, or my favorite wrestler, Mankind, but he never really had much of a movie career. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Are there any like wrestlers that are like genuine movie stars that didn't do like a kids film like this?
Mm-hmm.
There's what's his face from They Live?
Oh, Roddy Piper.
Right. I guess he avoided. Right. I can't.
Yeah, good for him. Did Triple H do a children's film?
Yeah, he did like something with like a school bus.
It wasn't a big one.
Yeah, it was just like I don't know.
The Chaperone.
Is that what it was called?
Yes, it's called The Chaperone. It's got like him with his arms crossed. He's like folded. And there are kids on top of the bus. I mean, obviously, there's bad guys on top of the bus. It's like they're trying to rob the children's bus. A former bank robber skips out on one last job for the gang so he can accompany his daughter on a field trip. It's a must see. Yeah.
I don't think that one even went to theaters.
I don't think it did either.
But yeah, this is Playing with Fire. It's like another C- film. I don't need to spend more breath talking about this. I think it is what it is. If you're gonna see it, kudos. Hope your family and you enjoy it.
Have a blast.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, life is short. If this is what you want your money and your time spent on, God bless. Have a good time. But otherwise, I can't see any reason why anyone should check this out. It is what it is. It's not any better or any worse, I think, than what you'll expect. It's exactly what's on the tin. It's what you see in the trailer is what you get here. And if anything, it's actually maybe a little nicer because the message, there is actually kind of sweetness to the end. But by then, it's just like, I don't we've seen this before.
I hear it pairs very well with the Flintstones and WWE's Stone Age SmackDown original movie.
Yeah,
so I hear those good double feature.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say Instant Family or maybe Only the Brave if you have a little bit of a twisted perspective. But let's go with the Flintstones WWE thing. I haven't heard about that one. I heard about the one with Scooby Doo.
No, the Simpsons, the Flintstones got in on it as well, and they're one of their very few works of the modern 21st century. They've Fred Flintstone meet famous John Cena Stone and other famous. Wow, that is really lazy. They just put Stone at the end of John Cena's name.
Couldn't get Emma Stone.
Oh man, yeah. Some of the names for these characters are just not.
I heard
Vince McMahon is Vince McMagma. I mean, that's pushing it.
I didn't see that one, but I did see Surf's Up 2 with that was co-produced by WWE, which also had John Cena in it, as well as Paige from the inspiration for Fighting with My Family.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and the only thing because I was not to spoil anything, but I was drinking pretty heavily while I was watching Surf's Up 2. And the only thing I remember is there's a scene with Vince McMahon where he's doing an interview and he's an otter and he is thinking about drinking milk from a blowfish, and in the interview the camera pans up to his thought bubble where he's has a straw and a blowfish's anus, and he's drinking the milk out of it, and the fish's eyes just keep going wide. And in the context of the on-screen interview, the reporter can clearly see it because she looks disturbed. And it just happens. It's just that's a scene that's in this movie. I'm just supposed to go on with my life after this, I guess. So
a real Miyazaki.
Yeah, it's just there's Miyazaki with the cat car or whatever thing from My Neighbor Totoro, and then just Vince McMahon as an otter drinking milk out of a fish's anus.
It's I don't know. I mean, Martin Scorsese played a fish one time. Maybe there's just this weird. I don't know. Is that cinema? That's the thing. Would Scorsese consider this cinema because it involves a blowfish?
He would definitely say it's cinema.
Yeah, I think so too.
It took a risk.
It did. It's a very human tale. It's a very fish tale, literally. yeah, that's a good pun. All right, so that's basically our episode. I hope you had fun. Real quick, next week, as we mentioned, we got Ford versus Ferrari coming up. We also have Charlie's Angels. We also have The Good Liar. I think that's the Ian McKellen, Helen Mirren thing. It's Gone Girl for the elderly. And that's quite a subgenre.
Yeah, that is. In limited release, we have Waves, which is the new A24 film, as well as Everybody's Everything, The Warrior Queen of Jahansi, and Scandalous, The Untold Story of the National Enquirer. And also just remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and Stitcher. And also you can hang out with us on Facebook and Twitter, which I manage. And if you send a message, there's a decent chance that I'll message you back. And also you can always email us at cinemaholics@gmail.com. Cory, thank you so much for indulging me and joining us for another episode of Cinemaholics.
Yeah, thank you so much. We didn't quite do anything as embarrassing as talking about Dumbo for 90 minutes, but I like to think we got close. Yes.
So I think our quota has been set. So
I'll take it.
With that, I will say from the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
And from the Internet in Nashville, I'm Cory Woodroof.
All right. See you, everybody.
Bye.